So, phone cameras. Let's have a discussion about computational photography and the entire sort of premise of the course that our photographs need editing in order to be their best possible photographs. So, Google has come out with a Pixel phone, but iPhone, this is the Pixel 6, that's brand new. There are some improvements. It's an Android phone, and it's definitely a hot competitor to the iPhone 13 and iPhone 12. So what is computational photography and why does it matter? And what about the premise of this course that editing comes into play for pretty much nearly all your photographs, and why is that? So I'm showing some advanced features of the Google Pixel, but this would be true of sort of any modern phone. And it all begins with the concept that for any given piece of film in the old days, or any digital sensor, that there is dynamic range of the light from shadows to highlights that extend beyond the capabilities of any individual sensor or piece of film to record simultaneously the brightest tones and the darkest tones in one shot. Regular analog photographers have approached the problem, most notably Ansel Adams with his zone system, on how to accurately measure the light in a highlight and the light in a shadow, and figure out how many stops or doubling of light from, in terms of candle power, in terms of the power of the light. Think of it like almost like an electrical voltage. If you said that we would make a good exposure in the shadows to capture detail and not block it up, and then you looked into the highlights, you'd find that the highlights were what we call blown out. They are beyond the normal range of the film normally developed. With the zone system, then you decide or discover how many stops difference there is in the highlights, and then underdevelop it or develop it very specifically according to that one image, in order to pull those highlights back in order to be able to make a decent print. That was the heart and soul of Ansel Adams' zone system. And the opposite is true as well. If you're in a very low contrast situation where there isn't much differentiation between highlight and shadow, you could expand the development of your film. So we arrive at the digital age, and we're back to the same problem, only now we're not using developer to be able to push and pull how the exposure works. So photographers developed what we call HDR, high dynamic range techniques, where you would take three or more images, one for the shadow, one for the midtones, and one for the highlights, and then combine them in Photoshop. So again, either of these shots have high dynamic range, but computational photography is built into your phones now, which means that when you press the button once, it's taking a series of pictures and combining the very best exposures across the entire range of the images that the camera took. And so in effect, it's doing the editing for you. When we were using a single sensor and taking a single shot with a DSLR, we would shoot in RAW and work to contain the highlights and the shadows using RAW sliders for exposure, highlights, and blacks. We've sort of bent over backwards to try to again, bring the tonality into a beautiful range where highlights have texture and shadows have texture. And here in this shot of a cave, again, the shadows have texture and detail. And out into the sky, there's texture and detail in this bright, bright light out here. Okay, that's called HDR. Modern phones now combine that automatically. Not only that, but they're doing a preview on the screen, so you can see what it's going to look like as a finished image, which is amazing to me. Another thing computational photography has worked out is how to give your images a background on portraits that is out of focus. We call that bokeh. I call it depth of field fall off, old school. And that happens when you have a wide lens, a lens with a wide open aperture, a more telephoto lens. And the problem with phones is that their sensors are so tiny that and they use wide lenses that the backgrounds on portraits were always sharp. And through the magic of software, it's able to detect which is the face and which is the background and apply a blur to that, so to sort of mimic what a digital SLR camera can do. Okay. Some very powerful editing tools are built into the software now, so it's not even necessary, if you know what you're doing, possibly, to not even have to use Photoshop. Between all the computational advances and the editing controls, here's a case where with a portrait light mode, and this is true of the iPhone series too, you can adjust where the light is. You can adjust how much blur is in the background with sliders. Notice how the light is changing as you move this around. What else? Dual exposure now with this particular model, where you can, with a slider, dial up how much exposure is in the shadow and how much is in the highlight separately. So that's kind of amazing to me. And even more amazingly is how sensitive, not really how sensitive, but how stacking up multiple shots in one shot can allow you to shoot under extremely low light conditions. Again, this is really, really hard to do well with a regular analog photography. You would use a tripod, a time exposure, you'd tell your subject not to move. Now you can handhold your camera, your phone cam, and it's going to take multiple shots and combine the sharpest elements and kind of an additive process, add up their exposure so you can work in much lower light. And amazingly, even shooting stars, astrophotography, handheld. This is stunning. I mean, this is such new developments, and it's stunning new developments. One other problem with cameras, phone cams, is that because they go in your pocket and your hands are all over them, that if there's any kind of smudging on the lens, that's a big problem. This phone will tell you and alert you when you've got to clean your lens off. All right, it's smudging from the minute body oils on your skin, mostly. And that would cause lens flare and cut down on the contrast of the picture and make it not so good. So be sure you clean your lens or check it before you go shooting. Of course, you can share into your favorite social media, and you should be able to go posting directly into Google Drive as well if you put the Google Drive app on your camera. This is interesting, more computational. It learns who you like to photograph the most, and then this is stunning to me. I mean, it's picking out the very best facial expression on its own. It's called Top Shot here. get more smiles and fewer blinks. And normally, again, when you take pictures, you would take 10 to 1 or so. And then you would edit according to which is the best shot, and so on. The camera is doing that with faces for you. It's taking the 10 shots and then picking the best one. One other problem with camera phones is that, again, because they're so skinny, they have difficulty doing telephoto. So Google has been working out that issue and does include a telephoto lens in the Pro series. When you zoom in by pinching on your phone, you're reducing the quality greatly because you're using smaller and smaller part of an already tiny sensor. So you need an optical way to get telephoto shots. And again, iPhone 13 has it, I think, in the Pro level. Ultra-wide lenses is another way to shoot and see the how to pull in details in the foreground to create an interesting composition. So, sounds like I'm a salesman for a phone here, but I'm really not. I'm just stunned by the specs on what's happening, especially computational photography. 50 megapixel sensors, 3 lenses, telephoto, a normal, and an ultra-wide. All these are software. Magic Eraser takes people out of the background of a shot automatically. Motion mode, that's kind of interesting too, where if there's some motion in a shot, it'll freeze the face perfectly but show motion. White balancing manually, which is a good thing to know how to do. Night shot, as we've talked about. Top shot, picking the best shot, on and on and on. All these things that a course like this normally teaches you how to do through the editing process, but the camera is doing it for you, essentially. So that changes a lot. Anyway, that's a rundown on some thoughts about computational photography and why I'm not only allowing but encouraging you to use your phone cams if you have a more modern one for the course, and especially in the Photo 1 course, and not to be shy about that. If you do have a DSLR and lenses, of course, I'm happy to work with you on that and teach you more about that. So that's it. I've gone on enough. See you on the blog.